Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us for another Building Pulse. Today, we are going to introduce you to a developer named John Kennell. He is a developer that's primarily operated down in the Waikato region and has built over 1,000 houses in the last 20 odd years. And he has got a lot of attention in recent weeks, having told Hamilton City Council in their council meeting that they're making life too difficult for developers, and he's going to exit developing in Hamilton and move to other areas, which is a pretty big call and reflective of a lot of the frustrations that I suspect people are feeling everywhere. And so he's got some really interesting history and viewpoints around where we came from, where we're at, and then we'll go into a conversation around what does the future look like. This conversation was a great conversation. It ended up being quite a long conversation. And so we're actually going to split this podcast in two, and we're going to start with looking at where we've come from and some of the problems that we have today. And then part two, we'll go into what are some of the solutions for the future, and is there still hope for developing? And therefore, because if there's no hope for developing, then how on earth are we going to house New Zealand, which even in tighter times like now still has a positive net migration? So people need homes. They need warm, healthy, quality homes. And so this is just an ongoing issue. So let's go ahead and bring in John, and we hope you enjoy this conversation and reach out and let us know your thoughts. Cheers. All right. So thanks for joining us, John. Why don't you kick off and just tell us a bit about who you are, what you're doing, and what got you into development in the first place, and then we'll take it from there.
I am a property developer. I'm a property investor first, and then property developer. And the reason I say that, I bought my first rental property in Cambridge in 1997. I still own it today, so that's something like 28 years now. I've owned that property, and it's pretty indicative of my property portfolio. If I buy a property or build a property and decide to keep it, then I keep it. Why would you sell? If you need money, then that's what banks are for, right? They're quite happy to lend on housing. So if you need to take money out for a business venture or whatever it might be, then you can refinance. Why would you sell a property, basically, if it's a good one and you're happy with it? Yeah. So I bought that property. I was living overseas. I was in London working, and I've saved up some money. And my parents had always told me to, you've got to buy something, so you've got a home to come back to. I guess on one side they wanted me to come home, and the other was good advice, right? Because I ended up staying in Europe for about a decade. So it ended up being quite a good time to buy, even though I bought at the peak. It was 97. There'd just been a big run up in the market, and prices had gone up like crazy. And I think I bought that property, and it didn't really do anything until about 2004. For about 6 or 7 years, it was dead flat. I bought right at the top of the market, but 28 years later, who cares, right?
Did it still stack rental wise though? It obviously carried you through, or there was
it was getting about a 10% return at the time. They were all selling for about 10% because I was a novice. I'd read Rich Dad Poor Dad, and I was like, okay, yep, I've got to buy something, as well as mum and dad's advice. But I read that, and that's really got me started. But I didn't know where to start. I jumped in a car with a real estate agent, like you did in those days, and they drove you around.
Yeah.
They said this property's gone up, and this street's good, and then they took me to do a few, and I bought one, and and that's. So I guess that's how a lot of people start out, right? They take a punt. I mean. Obviously we know a little bit more today, and there's a lot more that you would look into, and you'd look a bit more at demographics, and is that town growing, or are people leaving, and what are the areas like, what are the schools like, and there's a whole lot of things you would look into. But I didn't know that then.
Yeah. And so I'm guessing you continued to accrue rental properties, but at some point you made the switch and said, "No, I'm gonna start building stuff for myself." When did that happen?
After I came home. So right. I bought Richmond Street. Then I bought a property in the UK that we lived in. Then I bought a rental property in the UK, and that I actually did up. It was actually a property I bought from the council in Woking. They were selling off some of their council flats. It was in pretty bad state of disrepair. So I tidied that up, and I rented it for a few years, and ended up selling it and did quite well out of that. Bought another one up in Nottingham, and then we had our place in Guildford. So. So yeah, that was quite good timing. The UK market was just coming out of a big slump, and then I ended up buying a couple of properties and a couple more in New Zealand and Cambridge and Hamilton. So by the time I got back home, I had a reasonable rental portfolio, and I continued to add to it. So a lot of people do that BRRRR model. They build, they renovate, they revalue, and then they sell it. I kind of did a take on that where I kept it.
Yeah.
Right. Revalue it, use that equity and my salary, and buy another property. So, but then it got to a point, I think a couple of years after I came back home, I was like, yeah, this is okay, but I'm not finding the houses that I want. They're not giving me the yield that I want. They're older properties which are requiring more maintenance. So I decided to develop for myself. And I built my first block of townhouses, just 4 units, 4 3-beddies by the university. And I built them 3-bed, 2-bath without a garage. And our people at the time thought I was completely mad. But what I'd seen is from my own rentals around the university that students just ended up living in the garage, which is pretty substandard living, really. And I thought, why build a garage if someone's going to live in it? I'll build a 3rd bedroom instead. Those properties did really, really well. And then I moved on to the next one, another 4, and then I haven't looked back since. So I've built just over 1,000 rental units in Hamilton now. Most of them walking distance from the hospital, the university, and in the CBD. Mm-hmm. Everything's been built for rent, so with tenants in mind. So there's often a lot of debate in the media, and they're talking about investors stealing houses from first home buyers and competing with them in the market. Well, a lot of the property that I bought is not something or built is not something that a first home buyer would want. Right. So some of them I've built a few blocks of studio apartments. I've built a number of multi-room properties where I built a big townhouse with 4 big bedrooms. The bedrooms are maybe 25 square meters each. They have an ensuite and a kitchenette, and then people rent per room, and then you have a big shared lounge kitchen as well. But I'm not competing with home buyers with a product like that, right? It's been designed for rent. It works for tenants, and especially there's actually a lot of people who want that type of accommodation. People who are on their own, they don't really want to get into a flatting situation. They just want to pay their rent, look after their area, and move on. So I've tried a bunch of different housing types over the years. Very, very little in the way of standalone, mostly multi-unit townhouses and duplexes. And part of that has been trying to keep the costs down, right? So to keep the rents affordable for tenants, but also to keep the purchase price affordable for the buyer, right? Because again, unlike the media would like to portray, most property investors that I've met, people who bought from me, are not fat cats, right? They don't pull up in a Rolls Royce. They're regular mum and dads who are in their 50s and 60s. They've got teenage kids. They've got some equity in their home, and they're looking ahead in their lives, 10 years down the track going, how am I going to work less or retire? And, how are we going to build up some equity so we can help our kids buy a house? And someone puts them in touch with me, they buy an investment property. And as long as they keep it long-term, they've done well. And that's one of the reasons I still like doing what I do is that it helps both the mum and dad property investor and the tenant, right?
Yeah. So you've been doing it a number of years. You've obviously seen a bunch of changes over that time. And the assumption would be that when you started, things were a lot easier I'd like to talk about what was easier, say 15, 20 years ago, from buying land, getting consent, actually building, and the sales. Those four kind of areas.
A lot of things were easier, definitely. It was easier to get financed. You could sit down with your banker. I
Yeah,
remember Norm from ANZ. We'd sit
yeah,
down, have a coffee, talk about what we wanted to do. He'd go, "Yeah, we can do this. We can't do that." And if he said you could do it, then you could do it. Then he'd just
yeah,
have to go away and do whatever he needed to do at the bank, fill out the right forms, and it was all okay.
yeah,
Today, you sit down with the bankers and they talk about what you could potentially do, what you potentially can't do, but in reality, they don't have any say over
yeah,
the process. It's been far more centralized, and the local guys have lost more control, which is really sad. Really,
yeah,
makes the job a bit more interesting, less interesting for them. And yeah, just sort of yeah. But we're getting more of that at the moment. We seem to be in that cycle of bigger is better, centralized is better.
yeah,
Take everything back to the center, and then one small group can make all the decisions. And I totally disagree with that. I think decisions should be made locally, a lot more. Whether it's banking, whether it's councils, or it's politics. But we can talk about that a bit
yeah,
later. So
yeah,
things that are easier, definitely easier to get a better yield. To be fair, interest rates were higher, so you needed a higher yield.
yeah,
Um, it was probably easier to get nice tenants,
yeah,
like just people who had respect for the property and for you as the owner, and it was a two-way street. We respect the tenants and they respect us, and everybody's happy.
yeah,
It's a bit easier to get caught out today, and I think we've really created that culture of us and them in New Zealand. Whether it's politicians or the media or both of them have tried to make out landlords to be the bad guys who are living off their tenants,
yeah,
which is just a ridiculous narrative, really.
yeah, yeah. Fascinating. Yeah, because there's a whole bunch of things. But yeah, culture, overall culture, and there's multiple inputs into that culture around why it's changed. But that's huge. And
It is because we definitely have more. Probably, I would say we have more damaged property now than we did in the past,
and
and that's through a lot more thorough vetting process now than in the past.
yeah,
And you've still got the issue. I mean, but landlords, you have to be so careful now. It's one of the reasons that when they changed the rules with the last government, and just for a while there was just a flood of new regulations. It seemed like every other day there was something coming out of Wellington. In fact, I came across a blooming list somewhere. I can't find it, but it was the interest deductibility and bright line and
yeah,
90-day no cause tenancies, and I just looked at all these things that were changed. It was just nuts.
yeah,
But it was the inability to give someone notice without cause
yeah.
that caused the people to end up living in motels.
Mm.
And we knew it and we said it in advance, and they went ahead and did it anyway. And landlords had to be incredibly careful. And then all of a sudden, boom, motels were full of people because landlords were no longer willing to take a risk on them.
And then coming forward to now, give me a little snapshot on what sort of stuff have you been doing over the last few years? Are you how much are you buying and selling? Do you keep a portion every time or just when it suits, or how does that side of it work? Um, and then we'll get into the challenges that you're now facing and what you're trying to deliver.
Yeah, so my property portfolio only grows, right? Because I buy and hold.
Yeah.
So and I still buy the odd. Well, if I'm buying existing property, it'll be property that I intend to develop in time normally.
Right.
And then when I do a development, like the one I have underway in Cambridge at the moment, we're doing 10 single level 3 beddies near the Leamington shops. Then I'll keep that, and I need to decide that from a tax perspective. I need to decide that upfront, right? Before I buy the land. It has to be in a long-term hold entity, and I need to get a builder to contract a builder to build that development for me, right? So I'm not a developer. It's
Yeah.
that's a long-term hold, and it's built by someone else, and I'm basically just a customer buying it. So there has to be a very, very clear delineation today. It's not as easy as just going, okay, I'll build it and then I'll keep one of those. But let's go back to so keeping the property portfolio and then doing developments alongside it. I very much I follow the cycles very much. I'm very interested in economics, macro and microeconomics.
Yep.
I actually traded in Zurich and London for a few years in the derivatives market, and so I know a little bit about financial markets, and I still trade a bit. And it really interests me. Is trying to work out what's happening, what's going to happen next, right? So, how's the market going to be affected? What are interest rates going to do in currencies and so on? And so I'm always looking out for, where are we in the cycle? What should we be doing now? So right now, I think we're coming out of a slump, right?
Yeah.
And how quickly we come out and how many years it takes, I don't know. But I do know that, or I do think that we're through the worst of it. Rates have come down; they're going to come down further. So now is a good time to be buying development land, getting consent, and getting it ready for when the market picks up. And that has worked well for me. So, for example, in 2021, at the peak of the market, I was selling land that I had bought earlier and consented to people who were coming into the market in the boom, who wanted to do a development, and I could go, well, here's a fully consented site, you can take it and do it.
Yeah.
So that's where I want to be, is that contrarian, right? Doing the opposite to what most other people are doing. So I'm continuing to develop. I'm still buying sites. We've got consents and for processing, a number of different consents. We're at different stages. But it is very tricky now.
Yeah.
Right? Consenting is a very tricky process. And again, things that have changed, consenting. In the old days, I knew guys, other developers who did their own resource consent. They just had a Word document and they just updated it. My surveyor did it. So I'd have a surveyor who would do the resource and subdivision consent, and then the architect would put in for the building consent, and then you're away.
Yeah.
Right? Today, I have to start with a town planner and a surveyor and a civil engineer, and then we often need to involve people around now water and wastewater modeling. And this is before we submit for resource consent.
Yeah.
Right?
This is all up front.
It's all so much upfront, and councils are pushing for more and more upfront. And this is, you're spending this money and time before you even know for sure what you can do with the land.
Wow.
Which is
almost
just
like there used to be this period where everyone was, angry at the councils for the RFIs, and so they decided, we've got the solution to that. Before you submit it, let's deal with all our RFIs up front. And you can start paying consultants at the start, and then we won't have RFIs because we'll make you do all that up front.
And I think when it really changed, there was the RFIs. Also, when they brought in the 20-day processing time limit, when councils had 20 working days.
Yeah.
So all they did was not accept your consent until it met this massive checklist.
Yeah.
So they only processed for 20 days, but the process started a month before that. Right?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, you see that. I just did a minor, little bathroom renovation, and I could see that same process take place from the very first inspection. It was all about, or even prior to, it was all about what was going to be coming. It was checked. Yeah.
So now, for example, we've just on a development site in Cambridge. We had to wait for modelling. We had to send away. So council had to send away. We weren't allowed to do it. We had to prepare all the information and so on. Up front, we checked: is there an issue with water and wastewater? And in Cambridge, the whole town is restricted, right? So you don't know. So you contact council, and then they give you some kind of an indication. But then, because it was more than 10 units, council had to send away for water modelling to a consultancy in Christchurch, And then they sent away the wastewater modeling to a consultancy in Auckland. Right? Why they didn't go to the same consultancy, I don't know, because both now need to get up to speed with Cambridge, with their model, with the development site, etc.
Yeah.
I think, don't quote me on the numbers, but the water modeling was I don't know, it was about, I think, 3,700. The wastewater was about 6,000, right? For these consulting reports,
which of course gets billed back to you.
Of course, it gets billed back to me, but it gets better because, and this happens across the board now with consulting. So this consultant returns a report, but the council don't have the people with the qualifications to review that consultant's report, okay? Because there are so many new rules that no one can keep up, right? You can't hire enough staff to manage all the rules.
Yeah.
So that report that is sent to another consultancy who then reviews what the first consultant's done. Well, the reviewer consultant, he's an expert, right? So he disagrees with the first guy. The problem is the first guy is also an expert. So now you're paying for two consultants to argue with one another and pay counsel in the process to argue over something that you didn't need 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? And you go, oh, housing's too expensive. Oh, it takes too long to get consent. But they just keep bringing in new processes, new regulations, more consultants. In fact, I just heard about yesterday, someone sent me, have you seen this new thing in Auckland where you have to wrap your development site in bubble wrap? It's what is it? Acoustic fencing.
Yeah.
What is that about? It's like these big like soft sound things, but you have to put up a strong structure
to
hold them because they're heavy. You can't pile because piling makes noise and vibration. We're not allowed to do that anymore. So now we need to drill first and then put the pile in place and put concrete about it. And then, but you're going to have to put up these acoustic insulation. And apparently there's a 73-page report that a consultant needs to do. Like
this is for every development now.
I don't know for which. It was just a developer who sent it through to me and said this is what had been required to do, and he sent me a photo of it. And I just thought, because you know where this is heading. I mean, if you start putting up these structures, acoustic structures, I can just see it. You fast forward 8 or 10 years down the line, maybe not even that far, you'll probably end up having to wrap your whole site. With like that white stuff they put over houses sometimes, that wrap. And then if you wrap your whole site with that, it's going to get hell of a hot inside. So then you'll probably need to put air conditioning in it, right? So we'll end up building a building over our development site so we can build our buildings underneath it.
Yeah.
I mean, you may think I'm silly, but mate, this is what happens when you've been doing this for 21 years and you just see one rule after another coming in and you just go, what is this for?
It's a really good point because I do kind of go, oh, that sounds ridiculous. But, 20 years ago, if you had said to yourself that one day you'll be paying consultants to argue with each other over whether or not you can do something, we would have said that's ridiculous. Ultimately, is this getting driven by underinvestment in infrastructure, and so everything's pressed? Is that the driver for all of this requirement?
I think it runs way deeper than that. I think New Zealand has drifted so far from the things that made us great. The number 8 wire mentality, the innovation, the just give it a go. I mean, I grew up on a small farm in the Coromandel that Dad cut out of the bush. Right, you couldn't even go to a Mitre 10 or a Bunnings to buy stuff. I mean, for one, it was probably an hour and a half's drive to Thames on gravel roads, but they wouldn't have had it. You would have had to order it in. So people just made what they needed, right? Yeah. And that happened all around the country. And, people, I'm sure there'll be people listening who, were helping their dad fix a truck, and you just didn't have the parts. So you cobbled something together and, that's how we did stuff. But we're now become this nation of box tickers. Yeah. You can't turn around without someone holding a clipboard, making sure you're doing it properly.
Yeah.
It's just no personal responsibility, just everything has to be managed by somebody. It has to be some kind of there has to be some kind of a process that everyone has to follow, and everyone has to go through all these steps. And it's stifling growth. It's
Yeah.
stifling innovation. We're at a point now where it is far easier for someone at council to stop development than it is to go ahead. It's far less risky, right? Because if you can't do your development, there's no way they can get into trouble.
Yeah.
So
it comes down to risk, right? And risk of not managed risk. It's like avoid all risk.
yeah,
It's not, okay, this is a risk. How do we manage it? It's there's risk there. How do we stay the hell away from it? And that's just stifles everything, right?
I mean, like this acoustic insulation. Well, what's that for? Because what? Because someone working in the office across the road might be annoyed for 2 days while you're doing, while you're making some noise. I mean,
Yeah.
or the next one I'm having to deal with in Cambridge is naming my driveway. It's like a 40 or 50 meter long driveway. I have to go through an official road naming process. That means coming up with a name that council's happy with, and then contacting Mana Whenua and asking them for their input if they're happy with it. Then I have to wait for an official council meeting and get it on the agenda for councillors to discuss this new name and whether they approve it or not. Then it needs to go to Land Information New Zealand, and they need to check it because it needs to go onto a map, right? And then we need to get a road sign made. So, and all for what?
Yeah.
For what purpose? There were 2 houses there. Now there are 10.
Yeah.
On a street in Cambridge, an existing street. Why does it need its own name?
And again, explain the risk to me. What is it that we're afraid might happen here if this isn't done right?
I tried to get answers. I think the only it's because Hamilton don't require it, but Waipa District do. And I think in the end of the day, it came down to something about how they their interpretation of treaty principles, I think, is what it was.
Right.
But that only explains one part of it, and I don't have an issue with that. Contacting, Mana Whenua and asking them, or if they have a name they want to gift to us. It's but it's the whole process. This thing takes 7 or 8 months to go through this process. We can build the houses faster than we can name the driveway.
Wow.
And again, it's why? Why?
Yeah.
Why do we keep layering this stuff on? And it's just more and more. And all we want to do is build houses, just want to build a house.
Yeah. Now you have been doing a bit recently, a little bit in the media, but also submitting to council and going and I saw a clip recently of you having a good go at council there, and you mentioned in that a project where it sounds like you were given resource consent, and then the handbrake's pulled up after the consent when you go to build.
Almost. This is a site in 5 Crossroads, which is an area of intensification for Hamilton City Council. I did a townhouse development there about 10 or 12 years ago. So it's been an area of intensification for a long time, right next to the Claudelands Showgrounds.
Okay.
If you've been there, which is, like our biggest event center in Hamilton, and it's good. It's really good, big showgrounds there. And there's a big park around it. And this development site's right on the edge of the park. There's a motel across the road. It's 2 minutes walk from the McDonald's at 5 Crossroads. So you're right in town. In fact, last year, council just came out and said that you can now go 6 levels in this zoning. Right, this is an area where they want intensification. You can walk, bike, you can bus to town. Like you're just on the other side of the river, on the east side of the river from the CBD.
Yeah.
So with all that in mind, and like I said, I always like to develop for rent near. It's got to be near somewhere. People can walk to stuff.
Yeah.
And so I bought these. We did due diligence on these 2 sites. We came up with a plan for 17 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom townhouses with car parks. I had the whole team involved, planner and surveyor and engineer, and all the usual. We set up a pre-application planning meeting with council. Let's say a non-binding meeting with council staff members, often multidisciplinary. So you have a planner, you might have a traffic engineer, you've got an engineer who deals with three waters. You've got a few different people there, and you present the development, and the purpose of it is really, well, my purpose is to go, hey guys, have you got any problems with this?
Yeah.
Because that's the point. Before I buy the land, at which I want to know if there's any issues. So we do all the due diligence that we can. But at the end of the day, as I say in my property development course, your number one risk today as a developer is the council. Okay. It's not the market cycles. It's not interest rates. It's not your buyer defaulting. Your number one risk is the council, the organization that's meant to be there to facilitate more housing. So we go in and they comment on things. There were no issues raised around water or wastewater. Okay. And prior to sort of mid 2023, it was never discussed in Hamilton, in the development community, right? Or with council. You can talk to anyone who's been involved, and it just wasn't a thing, right? You just, you knew your consent process, and the issue was around, can I get into the sewer? Is there a connection nearby? Is it on the neighbor's site? How do I get access there? Because councils won't help you get access to a neighbor's manhole. You need to try and negotiate it yourself. And if they say no, tough, you've got to go down the street for an extra, spend an extra $100,000 like I've done before. Yeah. But so there was no mention then. So I'm just looking at my notes here. So that was pre-app was 23rd of March, 2023. Then we lodged for resource consent on the 26th of July, 24. So a year later, we put in our consent. They had concerns with bats that might be in the trees and how they would be affected by the light coming off the townhouses. So we had to get people to go in and look at that. I've had it before. I already had people I could call, because I had bat listening people on site for 21 nights once, where I was told there were bats and they didn't hear one. That cost me about $18,000, but you don't get that back either, by the way. So we dealt with the bats. Then they had an issue with the neighborhood agreement, how it was going to function with rubbish and all this kind of stuff. And there were some issues around the driveway. And so we worked through this for a couple of months. And then the consent was cancelled because there's no sewer capacity in the area. So
you had consent and then it was cancelled.
Well, we submitted it, we're processing it, we're going through it, and then they just went, nah. But we said, no, we want you to process it, because I said, look, I've got $2.5 million tied up. Hang on. So I had a valuation on the land with 17 townhouses from CBRE at $2.9 million for those two sites.
Yeah.
And I can't just have them sitting there at risk, right? Because a problem we're having is because consents over the years have taken longer and longer and longer and longer to get a consent. Yeah. So what I need to do is buy sites further in advance so we can allow for that. Yeah. But that means I've got more and more land at risk of something changing. Like another site, 22 unit site, 5,800 meters of land in Dinsdale and Hamilton that I bought, and council lost the flood model, got a new consultancy to make a flood model. The flood model put the flood level up by 2 meters and covered the whole site. And then it went up again. Now it's at, it's like 3 stories off the ground. So that site's gone. So I'm going to have to sell that and lose money on it. But the risk, so these sites now on Brooklyn Road, which we can't develop. So we said, look, can we get a consent subject to sewer being available, right? Mm-hmm. Like you're in the process of upgrading it. This is an area of intensification, right? You have plans. Yes, we're working on it. Yes, we do need to fix this. Cool. Give me a consent subject to that. No, we're not going to do that. Okay, what about we store the wastewater and we pump it out at off-peak times? Like, there's not that many people up in the middle of the night using their bathrooms, right? Yeah. Unless they're unwell. So let's, pump it out. Then, this is done, and it's done in other parts of the country. It's not a strange thing to do. It's quite simple. The capacity is there. I mean, look, Claudelands is next door. They could have, I don't know, 20, 30,000 people there at any one point, and the wastewater can handle that. So, there must be some capacity at some point in time. But nah. I was like, okay, well, look, I can't just have this at risk. So I hired an RMA barrister, and then we went into legal talks with them, and they just started coming up with all kinds of other stuff that no, we can't. And just after a few months, we had to pull the pin because they've got deeper pockets than we are. So that $2.9 billion development site is worth today, if I sell them as the old houses, $750 each.
Wow.
So 1.5. So there's a $1.4 million loss, capital loss, let alone interest and everything, construction and so on. And this is the issue, right? So I can handle it. Here's a comment from one of my posts online. I won't say the name of the company, but they said, well said, mate. We're a young firm, been doing infill developments in Taranaki for 8 years now, and it's much the same here. We can't plan, we can't get any firm answers or direction, and we get contradictions between planners and asset managers. We can't afford to buy land and have a council member change trajectory on us. We have zero confidence moving forward. So, this sounds like a young, motivated builder, developer, is doing the work, building the houses we need. But, he's not in a position where he can take a hit like this. I can take that hit.
Yeah.
But, you're a 35-year-old builder. You've got debts and, you've got staff. You can't buy land after doing all your due diligence and everything's looking fine, and then all of a sudden rug pull.
Yeah,
you're out, right?
Yeah, and no liability. This doesn't cost the council anything. Everybody gets paid and goes home. Do you think there's a disconnect between local council and central governments in terms of objectives? And I get we've had multiple governments over your period, but this current government's coming in talking about a whole lot of changes. But is there a disconnect between what they're trying to do and the local government? And do you think that those things can actually come together, or is there something fundamentally broken in the system that they can have all the ideas in the world, unless something's shifted, doesn't matter what changes they make to RMAs and this and that? Talk to me a bit about that relationship between local and central government and how it's affecting you as a developer.
I think it's a fundamental issue. And I am in contact now for the first time in my life. I've always tried to stay out of politics, but I am in contact with the two mayoral contenders in Hamilton. I have been in contact with Tama Potaka, the new housing minister, and other ministers in Hamilton, like Ryan Hamilton. And because I actually support what the coalition is trying to do, right? It's it's such a relief to have new regulations being proposed that you can look at and go, I could see how that could help, right? Or right. That might make things easier, or I hope that works. So I one of the things I want to ask Tama about is, can he update me on, have someone in his team, someone who can update me with what they're up to and with dates and things like that, so I can share it. Because the media's, if the coalition make a misstep, the media will report it. If the coalition are doing good things around the RMA, may or may not get reported, right? So
right.
So at least I can provide my little bit of assistance with a bit of media attention I get in podcasts like this, and videos I can do online, and sort of, because I think that's what the industry's, we need more confidence.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
We need more information. We need some kind of a plan. It's as though everybody's just waiting. Right. Yeah. We're all just on hold. Yep. I'm like I said, I'm doing one development. I'm buying a little bit of a land for consent, but I know you like your car analogies. I'm idling. Right.
Yes.
And it's just, I'm just sitting there and I'm ready. The tank's full and I've got a trailer on. I've got all my gear up there, and I'm ready to go.
Yes.
But, show me the signs,
Yeah, I definitely think this government could be doing a better job. They came out swinging at the start. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And then it feels like silence. Now, the reality is, I think what's going on is in the background, they're preparing to do that, but it probably takes 18 months, 2 years. But a little
Yep.
bit of, like you say, a little bit of communication so that everybody knows it wasn't just fake promises. We're in the background, we're getting closer, and they don't like to commit to dates about when things are going to be done. But like you say, an update on where is it up to so far,
Yep.
so that the market can have some confidence that something's going to spit out the other end, and it wasn't just a campaign promise that will never ever be delivered.
And we're over those campaign promises, right?
Yeah,
I mean, that last government, oh my gosh, they came out with something every other day. Again, like we're going to do this and we're going to do that and we're going to build 100,000 homes and we're
yeah,
going to, it's like don't keep telling us what you're going to do. Tell us what you're actually doing.
yeah,
You know, post up some videos of you guys sitting around a bloody table in Wellington with actually moving this forward. That's what
yeah,
I want to see. I want to
yeah,
know you're doing it. And and
yeah,
and I don't think I'm the only one. I'm sure there are other people who get confidence from that and go, okay, this granny flat thing, you know, you can build these 70 square meter dwellings without consent. Well, you told me about 10 months ago that I could build a 60 square meter dwelling without consent. Now you're telling me I can build a 70 square meter dwelling without consent, but I can't because it's a proposal, right?
mm,
And until until I have the details, I can't invest
no,
in doing that. And this is where, and then because the big thing is what happens when I want to tap into the sewer and water connections for my
yes,
granny flat? What's the
yeah,
council going to do? And this is coming back to your question, right? This is
yeah,
this is the
disconnect,
connection
yeah,
between council and government.
yeah,
And I've said it many times. It's almost as though government's afraid of councils. Like they
mm,
seem to be a bit of a law unto themselves.
mm,
And they just, yeah, government can say one thing, but unless the council's on board, it's just not going to happen. It's
yeah,
not going to happen. And I just can't see it. If I can't get a consent because there's not enough sewer and stormwater, how are you going to allow everybody on my street to go and build a granny flat without consent?
yeah. Well, I
I
don't
mean,
think they are. If you look at the detail of it, they're still going to have to go and get the same um, request access to connect to the sewer, just like you are. So they could put the thing there without a consent, but connecting it up would be a different story. It's still
but
going to
then it's not a granny flat, right? Then it's a shed or an outside
exactly
room, and
at
you'd be
that point.
pretty mean to put your granny out in the shed without a toilet and a kitchenette and a
Yeah.
shower, and she has to come in through the rain and cold into the house. That's not a granny flat.
You're tapping onto something that I think is, we were talking before around a fundamental problem here. And one of the fundamental problems I'm seeing is that councils are too powerful.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard examples, and I don't want to get into trouble, and I couldn't quote things properly anyway, so I won't try, but where a council is essentially acting illegally and they're denying things that there's no legal framework to deny it. But who has the capacity to take on the council? Who's and for what end? And as a developer, you're being quite outspoken at the moment. Now that arguably comes with some risk because now the risk is that your name's been blacklisted, and every time you go to do a development now, things are only going to get harder because you've decided to jump in the ring and have a little box. That's too much power.
I agree. They have got too much power, and the problem now, like what we're facing today with this sewer and water capacity issues, is not just Hamilton.
No.
Auckland, huge problems with water care. I know Queenstown have got issues
Mm.
with sewer capacity. And hearing it again through comments on social media, people all around the country have said that they're facing the same issues. And my guess here, and this is really just a guess, but I have had a little bit of experience with councils over the years. I'm guessing that a few years ago, when our last government announced that they were going to take over Three Waters, they were going to centralize everything like they did with the polytechnics, and that worked out
Mm.
amazing.
Yeah.
That at that point, that councils went, hold on a second, our water and sewer and stormwater, all that infrastructure is going to be taken away, right? We won't own it anymore. Let's not spend any more money on it.
Yeah.
Now, that if they made that decision, I can actually understand that.
Yeah.
Right. Again, come back to your car analogy, right? I'm sitting there idling and I actually need a paint job, but you know what? It's going to be repossessed next
new
week.
tires. Why pay for new tires when it's about to? Yeah.
Exactly. So I should actually look up when that announcement was, but it's going to be what, 3, 4, 5 years ago?
I think it was in their first term, the first announcement. So yeah, be at least 5 years.
At least 5 years. Well, if you stop investing in infrastructure, maintenance and upgrades, or even cut back, or even don't go ahead with any of the, the increase in supply that's needed for the growing country. Because again, me is talking about immigration's down. We had 33,000 people come into the country last year, net immigration.
Yeah.
If 33,000 people moved to Hamilton in one go, you'd know about it, right? It's still a lot of people, and immigration's it's still coming.
Yeah.
And now with these closer ties with India, I expect there'll be even more immigration from India. There's already immigration from China, from Philippines are the biggest areas. And I've been to each of those countries, and I know where I would rather live, despite all of our problems. So we're going to continue to have immigration. We're continuing to grow. And also, I know for certain immigration is going to continue because it's the number one sugar hit that we've got, right?
Yeah.
When things aren't going well, when the economy's down, it's like, boom, flick the switch, immigration. And it's a big hit to the economy. And right now, other than immigration and milk, we haven't got much.
I mean, the interesting thing you're tapping into is, and it's something that I talk a bunch about with Cameron regularly, is New Zealand's got a massive problem when it comes to productivity. And
what productivity?
exactly, right? And bringing more people in isn't the solution. That in fact, I think our productivity goes down overall, because you've just got more labor to do more as opposed to getting smart and working hard. That's clearly affecting. I mean, productivity when you're trying to get stuff done is really effectively affecting your ability to develop and get things going. It's reversed. It's going backwards at the moment. So we're going to pause that conversation there, guys. Thanks for being with us. And we're going to release next week the second part of this conversation where we go into more around, what are we working towards? Where is hope? Where are the solutions, and what are possible solutions to unlock land to make developing and building houses easier in New Zealand? So thanks for joining us, and we look forward to being with you next week. Cheers.